Before we break down what happens in a tax court case, it's important to know what happens before the case gets to the court.
A main focus of the Internal Revenue Service is to receive all of the federal tax returns and review them to ensure that taxpayers comply with all federal tax laws. If the IRS has questions after the review, it may decide to examine the return.
An IRS examination can be triggered by several scenarios. Two of them are the most common. First, the IRS does not receive a return from someone it thinks should file one. Second, the IRS reviews a return and decides it needs more information about some of the entries on the return. In either case, the IRS will start sending letters to the taxpayer.
Usually, if the IRS decides to examine your tax return, the first thing you will receive is a letter asking you to provide information about certain items on your return. If the IRS questions your return, you may receive a series of letters and ultimately a notice of deficiency will be issued.
The notice of deficiency tells you how much additional tax the IRS claims that you owe. It tells you how the IRS reached this conclusion. The letter also gives you a chance to file a petition and contest the additional tax with the United States Tax Court. And it gives you 90 days from the date on the letter to do so. If you receive this letter, take note of the last date to petition the tax court. It is the final date that it's possible for you to file your petition, and all deadlines are critical.
If you file a petition with the tax court within the 90-day period, then the tax court can hear the case and decide how much you owe. If you miss the 90-day deadline, the tax court does not have the authority to hear the case and by law must dismiss it. A dismissal means you must pay the amount of tax liability assessed by the IRS. Case closed.
There are other situations in which the tax court can hear a dispute between a taxpayer and the IRS. One is when a joint tax return has been filed and one of the two taxpayers later wishes to be relieved of the taxes resulting from that return. This situation is also known as an innocent spouse case, and here is what may happen. First, the requesting taxpayer files a request for innocent spouse relief with the IRS.
If the IRS disagrees with the request, it issues a notice of determination of relief from joint and several liability on a joint return. If the case goes before the tax court, both sides are given a chance to tell their side of the story. The non-requesting spouse is called an intervener and can tell his or her side by submitting pleadings, testimony, and evidence at trial.
There's another type of case that the tax court hears where a taxpayer seeks to contest the IRS's efforts to collect taxes. If the IRS wants to levy upon assets of a taxpayer or files a notice of a federal tax lien, a taxpayer has a chance to request a hearing with the IRS Appeals Division to discuss the collection of those taxes.
The purpose of that hearing is to give the taxpayer the opportunity to do several things. 1. Find a way to resolve the case without a levy. 2. Convince the IRS that the taxpayer can't pay the tax without significant hardship. And 3. That there is a better way of collecting the taxes. Or in some cases, that the taxes are not due and should not be collected.
When you ask for this hearing from the IRS, it is called a collection due process case or a CDP case. When you petition the tax court for a redetermination of this kind of case, it is called a collection action, or in some instances, a lien or levy action.
We're going to move now to our example, which involves the Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC. This is an example where the IRS has disallowed the Earned Income Credit and other items on a tax return. A notice of deficiency has been issued, and this case is heading to tax court.
It's important to issue a cautionary note about contesting tax liability. If you have doubts about the validity of your case, we suggest you consult a qualified tax professional. The tax court has the authority to impose sanctions on taxpayers who bring what the court deems as frivolous or groundless petitions before the court, or who file a court case for the purpose of delay. Avoiding frivolous cases allows the court to spend time with petitioners who want to resolve their valid disagreements with the IRS.